So glazing, here we go, glazing 101. Very first rule in glazing is you want to make sure that the pot that you're working with does not have glaze on the bottom of the pot. And one way we do that is we wax the bottom. So you either come in and your bottoms have been waxed, or we use a means of applying either hot or cold wax to make sure that the wax does not sit on there. Why? Because when it sits on the kiln shelf and it hits to that 2,000 degrees and all the glaze melts, it fuses to the kiln shelf, then it cools and we go to pull it off and it's stuck, so then we use a rubber mallet and usually the pot loses. And we're taking away chunks of kiln shelf and it's never good. So by waxing the bottoms, that prevents that. So with those being waxed, that's the first rule. The second rule of glazing is you really need to make sure that you apply the right level of thickness of glaze to achieve the color that you're trying to achieve. What the heck does that all mean? Well, it means if you want this color for this ink, blue ink glaze, you have to apply a certain level of thickness. Now this is one dip of the glaze. So a dip in the blue gave this outcome. If you want it to look like that, you're gonna do one dip. If you want it to look thicker, you'll do a dip and maybe brush or a little heavier, but this is gonna achieve by one dip. And so when you are dipping or when you are pouring, you are applying a certain layer of glaze on the pot. If you are brushing, it's a lesser amount of glaze in which you would then apply 3 brush strokes to equate to 1 dip. So that's the ratio that we use here in the studio. 3 brushes equals 1 dip. Now when you read on the outside of each of these containers, it says apply 1 to 2 coats which may overlap in pouring and dipping. Apply 1 coat. We do not double dip. Okay, and what does that mean? Well, in life, you don't double dip, right? Avocado dip or ranch dip or whatever, you don't double dip, and you don't double dip. This was a double dipped pot, and what ended up happening was it just ended up going all the way to the bottom, and it took away chunks of the kiln shelf, and it has now become our demo pot so that we showed what not to do. So this is an overglaze, this is a double dip. Do not double dip here in the studio. Okay, so we talked a little bit about thickness of glaze to achieve what we're talking about. Here are some real clear examples of what that thickness of glaze can achieve. So this is a glaze called oxblood. It's a beautiful glaze. It's got all kinds of different colors going through it. And this is an oxblood being poured on the inside of the plate, run off, and then allowed to pool on the inside so you get that beautiful color and all the different sheens. And this is the same glaze on the outside, having been brushed 2 times to see what the outcome would look like, less applied or thicker applied, and it's significant. If you like this color, you brush 2 times. If you want this color, you pour it. Same thing here. This is a glaze called Tidal Pool. Absolutely stunning colors. This is one glaze, all those oranges and greens and blues, kind of fun stuff. This is one non-food safe glaze we have. It's called White Froth. It's down there in the corner marked with non-food safe. But she wanted to see if it came out like barnacles. So it's kind of cool because you see a couple different things with this. When regular glaze, glossy glaze, spreads, whereas this glaze crawls. It laid out in kind of a puddle and then crawls into itself and created that barnacle effect. Now anything like this is not food safe because it's exposed clay and bacteria and all that kind of stuff, whereas this is fine. But this is interesting here. This has been poured, this is Tidal Pool, and this has been brushed. So this gives you an indication of 1 coat, brushed coat of Tidal Pool is gonna give you this orangish color that's there, but you're not gonna get any of the other greens and blues that you would get where it overlaps and gets to be thicker. So again, the thickness of the glaze really equates to what you're trying to achieve. And you can see that in a little bit more here, where the glaze pools and breaks on either ridges or valleys. You can see the clear indication of where the different glazes can work and interact with the piece, and then sometimes it runs and drips, and then sometimes it pools, and you're getting all kinds of different effects. Now this is also an interesting one in which this is Tidal Pool with Jujube, which is it's a crawling glaze, but it's applied on a gloss, so it kind of pooled and it all looked cool. So again, little drips and dips and all kinds of neat things can occur. So where are we gonna go? We're gonna start with glazing our first piece, and that is gonna be taking this aside. So this is gonna be our first piece, and this is gonna be demoing. I think we're gonna start right with that. We got all the brushes, all the tools, everything we need. We got some glazes here. This is gonna be in blue ink. So we're just gonna take the blue ink glaze here, and I'm gonna allow that glaze. Blue ink looks like this. And when you lift the lid off and you look at the glaze, it looks like that, which is a little strange. We're gonna get a whisk. You can get any form of tool you would need, whether stir or a stick. However you want to get the glaze up, you go right down to the bottom. You want to stir the entire bucket, so make sure all the good stuff on the bottom comes up. Get right into the corners, get as much of that mixed in as possible. And if the glaze is all mixed up, shake that off and lay that down right on the lid. It's a nice place to lay all your tools and everything with that glaze on it. You take your pot, and you've got a couple different options here. One would be that we could hold it and dip it. One way could be that we would have glaze and we could pour it in. And the third way was we could brush it on. And so what we're going to do with this one is we're going to pour the glaze on the inside. And I think I'm going to take this container right here. This will look better for grabbing some glaze. Pull that in. It's all stirred up. And pour that glaze right on the inside. And then all I'm trying to do is give the glaze on the inside about a 10-second drink. Because what that does, it allows the glaze to soak into the clay body. And then I pour all the excess out, trying not to touch it with my fingers because it'll leave a finger mark wherever you do. Shake the excess out, and then you've got a really nice layer, coated layer of glaze on the inside. And what that's going to do, it's going to take a few seconds to dry. So we're going to take this pot and stick it right over here in front of the fan, and we're going to let that dry. So what do we do with this? Well, we're still going to use the blue, but I'd like to move on to pot number 2. So we're going to move this aside for right now. We're going to come back to this. And how am I going to remember where everything is at? Because I'm working on pot number 2. I've got some markers here, which are kind of helpful. This reminds me that that is coat number 1 on the inside of that pot. And so the marker sits over there on that pot. So I'm going to move on to number 2. When I move on to number 2, I don't want to use the same glaze. So I'll just move that aside, and what we're going to do is we're going to take the copper patina. Now copper patina looks like this color. Kind of crazy, beautiful, and when you lift it up, kind of similar, but again, not exact match. So you got to trust the fact that the glaze is going to come out looking the same way. Now for this one, what I'd like to do is I'd like to just dip the whole thing because I think that's going to be kind of cool. So what I'm going to do with that, I'm going to grab some dipping tongs. And when you use dipping tongs, you got to be careful because if you crunch them all the way through, you can see that you can actually go through the side of your pot. So you do hold with, I guess, strength, but not with intensity. Right? You don't want it coming loose, but you also don't want to crunch right through. So you hold the pot, and you're going to go down into that glaze. But before you do that, it's really important that you stir it up. So I'm going to use a slotted spoon for this one. Again, whatever thing you use. Yeah, I got really caught up thinking about how I'm going to use those tongs, and you got to stir. So again, whatever tool you use, make sure you get down in there and stir that up. So that's good there. Then we grab our tongs. And we're going to take our pot, and all we're going to do is we're going to dip half of it in, right? We're just going to dip half the pot in. So we go down, and I only want it to go down halfway. I give it a good drink, right? 10-second count, and then I lift it up and drip off and let all the excess come off, and that's where you can take your damp sponge and just hit the bottom. Prevents that clay from sitting there on top of that wax and building up. And then the dry sponge, boom, you're cleaned up. And you're still dripping a little bit. Take that off. And it all looks pretty good. So I'm going to let that go sit over here in front of the fan. And I'm going to give that a marker. That's on coat number 1. Just so I don't lose track of where things are. All right, so I think that's it for copper patina. That's all I'm going to do with that. So going back to the blue. So I'm going to cover this up. And I'm going to put the copper patina back. Going to keep those guys in front, and then this goes over in the sink. And I come back to our blue. All right, so this has got that blue ink all on the inside. And what I wanted to show you was what occurs when you brush. So I'm just going to lay it down on here because this gives us an opportunity to use it as a turntable. And then when you brush, you're going to be laying glaze on with various brushes. We've got all different types. The ones that we really like the best are the ones specifically designed for glazing. These are called hake brushes. They're from Japan. They're really good fibers, not fibers, what do you call it? Bristles. And then they got channels to where the glaze can clean up right in between. So we're going to use a big brush, but not the biggest brush. And so we're just going to grab one, and we're going to lay the blue ink on with this. So again, get down there, make sure it's mixed up, and then the brush just goes straight on. I'm just making sure that you got all the areas covered. And that's one coat. And that's good. I'm going to lay that brush right down inside the cup. And I'm just going to take this whole thing and move this right over here in front of the fan to dry. So that first coat has to dry, but then that gives me a chance to come back over here. And so I'm going to take that same marker that I had, and this is the first coat of brush that I have on there. So I kind of always know what coat that I'm on, right? So that's going to be helpful for me there. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take this copper patina and I'm going to dip it in the Ohata red. So I'm going to bring the Ohata red over here, and I think what I'll do is I'm going to move the blue away, just to be on the safe side, because you don't want to mix red into blue or blue into red or any of that stuff. So we're going to open that up, and you're going to see Ohata red comes out very scarlet red, and we're going to do a slight dip into the other side. Now it's really important, you can see there's one spot that's a little damp, and so maybe I'll just pick that up with the sponge. You want to make sure that anything you're dipping in here, there's no wet spot. You don't want any green to sit inside. There's just a spot inside, so I'm going to clean that up there. So when I dip into here, I'm going to make sure that I stir this up. Dip right down, and we have not used a stir stick, so that's what we're going to use. And so I'm going to let this sit. I'm not going to put any other accents on this one. You could if you wanted to. You know what? It's demos, right? So let's just do that. Let's do a shot of black. We're going to take a shot of black. This is incredible black. If you wanted to do something, you could always take a tool and do something random, something crazy. Allow things to drip and move, which gives you some motion to the pot. If you wanted to, you could also do kind of swirls and swizzles on the inside, and that would give you another random pattern that could be kind of cool. Now, mostly with these glazes, you're going to have fluidity with the accents that you would put on. Someone wanted to do lettering. If you put, T, E, D with that show, TED. It's a little difficult at cone 6 to hold that tightness of the lettering. So while it can be done, it's not going to be anywhere as detailed as you would like it to be. It usually handles at a much lesser heat level, cone level. All right, that black gets everywhere. So I think that's good for that pot. So I'm going to cover up black. Well, hot the red is done, and I think we are ready for our last and final coat on the blue. And when I bring that over, and blue comes over, and let's get our last coat on. So this will be the last coat of blue, which will then, the 3 brush coats of blue are going to give it that outcome of the single dip that we had looked at on the test tile. Okay, so with that being the final coat, I'm just going to kind of go through and just make sure everything's all covered all the way through and that there's no blank spots. If that all works well, just going to take the pot, flip it off, and then make sure that the rim is all nice and smooth and cleaned up, because some of the clay is dried around that rim, so you just want to make sure that that's nice and cleaned up and not scraggly and brittle. So there you go. So 3 good coats on that. I'm done with the blue, so all of this goes into the cleanup area and the lid goes back on top and all the tubes go together. And then we'll clean that up. All right, so as that is drying, and if you needed to touch the pot, you can just reach your hand inside. You're touching all the dry parts. That's sitting over there. That one I know is on coat number 3, so I'm not going to glaze any more on that. So that's got 3 markers in front of it, and I know I'm done with the other one. All right, so then the next thing, we're going to get our pot, and let's say I wanted to do some accents on that. So same thing, this is Blizzard Blue, which is a light blue, and make sure that it's coming out okay. And let's say I wanted to do just some vertical lines. You could do that. Very lightly, 1, 2, 3. And that would give it some different accents that could go along with that light blue on the dark blue. So you get a different outcome. And again, all you're trying to do is achieve varying outcomes for the pot. Different glazes that you lay on are going to create different outcomes. That's glazing in a nutshell. Let's get to it.